Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Rules of Engagement. As always, I'll be your host, Nick axslav ranish, as we explore tactics and strategies using professional Starcraft 2 and how you can use some of their ideas at home to improve your play and better understand how amazing this game actually is. So for today, we're going to be analyzing the Thorzain vs. Socke match that we had yesterday. Of course, Thorzain won that 3-0, but the matches were very interesting, and Socke had a lot of cool builds there, so and actually a lot of really good play on his end as well. So it's going to be a pleasure to analyze. We're going to start with analyzing game number 1, and then we're going to do game number 2 to game number 3, and of course, after we go over all 3 of those games, it's going to be time for the question and answer period. So tweet me any questions you guys have. Tweet to me at axslav, and at the end of the show, I will answer those questions. Let's just jump into game number 1, though. Thorzain vs. Socke, game 1. And this game is pretty interesting. There's a couple cool things here. First, we'll talk about one thing that Thorzain does very well, and that's the early game scouting in Terran vs. Protoss. If you're out there, what you do when you scout, if you're not a high-level player, you grab your worker, you run around your base, then you send it back to your base, and you proceed with your game plan. And what you're not realizing is the actual point of scouting isn't to run the worker in circles around the base. It's to actually kind of see what's going on. So we'll talk about things to look for. Then we're going to talk about preparing for anything, how Thorzain sets up a build and is prepared for whatever is thrown at him. And we'll talk about how to micro around Ignite Afterburners as a Protoss. Well, some things that you have to consider about the new metavacs, and as a Terran player, how to utilize those to greater effect. So let's jump into this first game, and we're going to start talking about the scouting. So if you're a Terran player, you grab your SCV, you go scout around, see if it's Nexus first. It's on Nexus first, you kind of run around in circles, and you poke, leave the base, right? Now this is where you in your game are like, okay, I know the Protoss is in the top left, and he hasn't expanded yet. Okay, boom, I know where he spawned. Well, I mean, if that's all you cared about, you should have not scouted, because you should know he spawned at the start of the game. It's a 2-player map. What the pros look for when they scout are a couple key things. So whenever you're scouting your opponent, what you want to do is you want to check for a couple things in priority. You want to check the chrono boost allocation, right? He sees there's only 25 energy on a Nexus at this point in the game. The Psycore just finished moments ago. In fact, we can jump right in here. Thorzain knows the time of the Psycore, knows that at this point it's just finishing. So when he comes in, if your opponent's you can tell there's no chrono boost on the Psycore, and there's very little on the Nexus, which means the chrono boost has been going to probes. There can't be any super fast aggression. He also checks for the gas mine, right? He doesn't just say, okay, he's on 2 gases, right? What he did is he clicked on both these gases, saw, okay, 150 gas mine from that one, and 30 gas mine from that one. It means he's mined 180 gas. Warp gate, and presumably a Socke has been built as 100 gas. It means he's probably got about 80 gas left in the bank. And he's got 3 probes mining, or actually this one only has 2, but 3, he's got 5 probes mining gas. It's a lot of gas income. I've got to be ready for some gas-type tech, right? And then, of course, the next thing he's going to check is the probe count. He dove in here, if you rewind it just a little bit again, you can tell, looking from Thorzain's point of view, as he comes in here, he dives in and just gets a brief look at the probe saturation count from this angle. Not a great look, but he can infer the probe count based on a chrono boost allocation. So he knows there's a decent probe count because he knows chrono boost is put on Nexus. And what's most important is he sees that there's a probe being built in the Nexus via the animation. So we can tell there's no probes being cut, at least at this point in the game. And the last thing he looks for is the pylon count. He sees 2 pylons, and he looks in a couple corners of the base, says, okay, is there another pylon there? Nope. Check the probe production and the gas mine again. Is there a pylon up in this corner of the map? No, I don't see any pylon over here. I mean, it could be way in that corner. But the fact is that there should be 3 pylons by now. So the fact that he doesn't see one means there's a high probability there's a proxy. The fact that there's a lot of gas mine means that it could be some type of tech being proxied. So these are all things, as you get really good with Terran like Thorzain, your scout, you don't just walk around their base and leave and say, yay, good job, I scouted him. You have to really observe and notice key aspects of their base and the implications that those key aspects have. So now Thorzain knows that there's a tech, it's a tech opening coming out of Socke, right? So he's got to be prepared for anything. And the idea behind being prepared for anything is a couple key things. He's got a couple minutes before any type of harass could potentially hit him. But what he wants to do is make sure Soccer poke at the front can't do damage. And then he also says, okay, since he's teching, DTs or AR are both high probability plays, so I'm going to get a missile turret in my main to prepare against an Oracle harass. As you can see, the Oracle with only 4 range is easily pushed back with the missile turret with his superior range of 7. And then the other thing he's going to do at this point to prepare is he wants to go ahead and make sure that any point in time when there could be a frontal attack, which isn't yet, because the current misallocation meant there couldn't be a lot of gateways out in front of his base at this point. But around the 7-minute mark, it might start happening, or more likely around the 7th or 8-minute mark. So he wants to go and give himself some vision. That's all this Reaper, checking for a proxy pylon, and then he's going to hang out at his watchtower, or ideally hang out at his watchtower, and he gives him all this vision here. Now, why is that vision so important? Because he needs to be able to react to a frontal attack, and there's 2 ways you want to react to it. You either want to pull all your SCVs in front of the bunker, which means that you've got to pull the SCVs when your opponent is basically here, which means that you need to have that vision in front of your base. Or you have to give up the low ground, which means, again, you've got to get the SCVs and the Marines all up the ramp before a sentry can force field the ramp, which again means you got to see their units when they're at least around this area. So it's very, very important to have this frontal vision. Super, super, super important to keep track of basically any potential frontal assault. And then, of course, you get to the point where you're like, okay, there's no frontal assault coming. If he's going to do 1 base stolen, it would have hit by now. I'm going to check for more proxy pylons. And then I'm going to go check to see what he's doing, right? Again, trying to find a proxy location of the Stargate. And then scouting around a little bit. And then he's going to scout to see exactly what his opponent was doing now that he knows it's not a 1 base play. He knows it's not a 1 base play because there weren't units moving across the map. And by a certain point in the game, he's got enough units, he doesn't have to worry about 1 base plays anymore because he already has a stronger army than his opponent. So he gets in there, sees this as Twilight Council, and now he's like, well, could be Blink, could be Charge, but it's basically 2 base, gateway-based composition, right? And then from there, he can proceed as normal. Having deflect the early Stargate harass, he's way ahead in the game because he took so little damage to that. So he can just go ahead and gear up for a great timing attack. So exactly what he's going to do. Of course, because force fields are such a strong tool against pure bio army, he's going to go ahead and wait for 2 medevacs before he launches his attack. Also, of course, waiting for combat shields to finish up. And, of course, concussive shells as well. Already has a +1 weapons on his ground units. So the last point I want to talk about this game, of course, Thorzain's with a big advantage. You might not have this type of advantage every time you play in this game. But I want to talk about the power that medevacs now have with the Ignite Afterburner's ability. So one thing against a drop, as a Protoss player before, you could see Protoss people putting like 2 or 3 Stalkers in their base around this area, right? But now if you're a Protoss player, and you just put those 2 or 3 Stalkers maybe at the edge, without Ignite Afterburners, what those Stalkers can do is the medevac comes in, they go ahead and they kill it, and it might drop 1 or maybe 2 bio units out before it dies, and then you just kill the bio units and you just totally negate the drop. Now with Ignite Afterburners, you put your 3 Stalkers on the edge, the medevac can actually fly right on top of the 3 Stalkers, drop the entire medevac of guys out, and then the 3 Stalkers will die to those bio units just because it can get over and land the units so much faster. So if you want to use Stalkers to deflect drops now, you've got to use a lot more, like 5 or maybe 6 Stalkers. The 3 just won't cut anymore. So Socke, very intelligently, says, you know what, I'm behind. I can't afford to take 5, 6 Stalkers out of my army. 1 High Templar can still do a pretty good job. Of course, feedback still does the same amount of damage. It's a one-click thing. Doesn't matter how fast the medevac moves. Feedback is still a great response to that. So as Protoss, you got to be a little bit more careful about drops. Of course, we can see Socke is already getting ready at the bottom side with his Mothership Core, and of course, his army is relatively close to that location as well. Now, the other part comes when a battle actually happens. So as we get into this game a little bit further, we're going to see, Thorzain's getting ready to attack here. Of course, Socke is also getting a cannon here to make sure this location is safe from dropping. And the important thing about attack is that ordinarily, right, in Wings of Liberty, you nail these force fields. Great forces, by the way, by Socke. If the Terran tries to pick units up with this medevac, you can usually focus it down and do, at least if you start focusing it right before it picks the units up, you'll kill before it can get away. With Ignite Afterburners, if Thorzain wanted to, he could easily pick up his whole army, jetpack, and get away safely. So you can use them a lot. You can use them to micro a lot more aggressively, do a lot more hot pickup type moves. So as a Protoss player, to prevent that type of micro, picking units up and dropping them right before they die, that really fancy micro, it's really important if a medevac's close to the front, put damage on it when you can. If you can see, that's what Socke does right now. Focuses straight for this medevac, right? And now as a Terran player, what you want to do is instant you see them focusing at medevac, now that you have that Ignite Afterbirth ability, you can actually save it. So before, that medevac right here, there is nothing Thorzain could do. Even if you act fast, you'd still die most likely. But in the new game, you can see there, you see that second medevac, you can get away so fast with new acceleration and movement speed that you can really micro them a lot better and try to keep them alive for as long as possible. Of course, Thorzain had enough extra units over Socke this game, he didn't need to use the pickup micro. But it's something to be aware of, and something as a Protoss player, you've got to soften up those medevacs so that it makes it much harder for them to use them to micro as the battle progresses. This wraps up game number 1. As we can see, Thorzain takes us pretty convincingly from here on out. One thing, the key part of this game that mattered is that early game scouting identified the chrono boost allocation meant there was no threat super early, but there could be a threat attack play, so be prepared for that with the missile turrets. And of course, get that Reaper out in the field or something out in the field so you have vision in front of your base and you can have reaction time necessary to react to any frontal attack coming your way. It wraps it up for game number 1. We'll take a short break and be right back with game number 2.